the role of Australia's growing population is playing in the housing crisis remains in the spotlight. It grew by more than 500,000 people over the year to June, driven predominantly by migration. Last week, the government passed its Housing Australia Future Fund. That builds 30,000 affordable homes, but that's over 5 years. Alongside that is the National Housing Accord. That aims to build 1.2 million new homes from July 2024. Given Australia's already playing catch-up on housing supply, one leading economist has suggested the annual intake of immigration would have to be cut in half to avoid overwhelming the market. Shane Oliver, the Chief Economist at AMP, joins me now. Shane, thanks for your time. It's a fairly drastic solution. Would you argue it's a fairly drastic problem and one looming to get worse?
I certainly would. The housing shortfall in Australia is a major problem. It's leading to all sorts of inequities, obviously an intergenerational issue. Baby boomers, Gen X have benefited from the surge in home prices, but very difficult if you're a millennial or a generation coming behind that. But I think it also is squashing the Australian dream, the dream of having, that quarter-acre block in a nice suburb. We're going to have increasingly congested suburbs, traffic jams, far from the quarter-acre block, people jammed in, even if you say 2 or 3 story buildings. Still far more congested than previous generations have become used to. And I think that the key point here is that we have been having very high levels of immigration, particularly since middle of last decade, middle of the 2000s. We had a bit of a pause in the pandemic, and I think that gave us an opportunity to reset here. But coming out of that, we've seen immigration levels surge to very rapid growth, such that we're seeing population growth on my calculations now for the last financial year only surpassed back in the 1950s. And I think that is making a already very difficult situation even worse.
When you say even worse, in very base terms, when we talk about a shortfall of housing, is it fair to say right now what we end up is a very, very tight market for both buying and in particular renting a house? But we do essentially have enough properties to cover the nation, but that a genuine shortfall could arise in the next few years, and that will lead to situations of people just having to try to stay in more emergency accommodation, staying on friends' couches, whatever it might be. That could be if we think we're in a crisis now, that would be a proper crisis.
That's right. It would get a lot worse. We already have record low vacancy rates in rental housing in many cities around Australia. Obviously, we've seen a renewed surge in property prices despite high interest rates as the demand numbers have picked up yet again. On my estimates, we've got a shortfall of between somewhere by June next year, we'll have a shortfall of somewhere between 165,000 and 285,000 dwellings, depending on what happens to household size, which we know fell through the pandemic. But each year, if we've got capacity to build, say, 200,000 homes a year, I know the governments are aiming for more than that, but the last little while we've managed to get up around 200,000. In fact, that was the 5-year average up until 2022. So if that is our capacity, 200,000, my estimate is that underlying demand is now running at about 220,000 people with these very high migration levels, which means that every year we're building 20,000 less homes than we actually need. And that adds on to the already shortage of housing. So as time goes by, the situation will worsen. It's great to see governments focus on boosting supply, all sorts of question marks around that. But as long as we maintain these very high migration levels, we'll be chasing our tail to some degree and won't really solve the problem.
Is there an element of waving the white flag, though, on doing this approach? It's hard to restrict visas. You've got to pick which visa types are reduced, and you might hurt the economy. Rather than surely it's within our capability to build more homes, to attract the skills needed. I mean, tradies are paid pretty well these days, from what I can tell, when you get work done. And then technology as well, whether it be AI or just plain robots. Some of the technology you see out there for, more basic builds, but maybe it is some build to rent in various places. Can't we turbocharge building finally?
Look, I think, we can do that. And of course, that's what the federal government and the states are increasingly seeking to do. And Victoria seems to have gone over the top on that front with its announcement yesterday, which is quite impressive in terms of trying to build 80,000 homes per annum over 10 years. That's the sort of thing you need. But there is a question mark as to whether you can even get to those levels. If you take the period up until through the second half of last decade, we managed to build more homes than normal because we had more units in the mix. So yes, you have cheaper, smaller accommodation, you can build more. But by the same token, that still only gets us up to maybe 200,000 homes, maybe a little bit more at a stretch. But I very much doubt we're going to get to the 240,000 homes that the federal government is promising, let alone the 80,000 that Victoria is seeking to do per annum. The other aspect is that this does require ever more drastic approaches. For example, Victorian government taking over the state planning authorities to release more land, but also to let faster developments go through. Yes, we want to speed up the development process, but you don't want to do that such that communities are having very much higher density living imposed on them, which has the effect of reducing the quality of life in Australia. Now, of course, a longer term solution to all of this could be to decentralise away from Australian cities. And I think arguably that is the way we should be going. But that will only occur over time and once the infrastructure is in place. So we can't rely on that in the short term. Meanwhile, we're running immigration levels way, way above what we even saw in the run up to the pandemic. Part of that is catch up, but it's nevertheless putting a lot of pressure onto the property market at a time when the property market is already facing a severe shortfall.
It's certainly a problem. As you say, that the ambition to build is there. We'll see perhaps if it's fulfilled or if we need to perhaps reduce that inflow of migration. Shane Oliver, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tom. Take care.